The second blessing of the Amidah is as memorable as it is long, so it's worth unpacking each of its several parts. The first blessing of the Amidah had both a paticha, an opening, and a chatima, a closing. But here we only have a closing blessing format and start without Baruch Atah. We begin the bracha by saying, "You are mighty forever, my master. You are the resurrector of the dead, the powerful one to deliver us." In recent decades, it's fallen out of fashion to praise people for the power they possess, and for good reason. Human history is a long chain of people abusing their power. So it makes sense that when we call God mighty, many of us are given pause. Is power such an honorable thing? However, I think this line makes the most sense when read in light of Pirkei Avot, where we learn, Ben Zoma said, "Who is mighty? One who subdues their evil inclination. As it is said, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules his spirit than he that takes a city," based on Proverbs 16:32. We see that what actually makes God great, according to Ben Zoma, is not exercising power over others, but directing that power inward to show enormous restraint. If God demands that kind of self-control from us, surely we can expect God to do the same. But once we get past being overwhelmed by God's might and power, we're hit with the blessing's striking claim that God resurrects the dead. Jews don't universally agree on what this means. Can we universally agree on anything? But a resurrection of the dead is indeed an ancient Jewish idea, and it's the closing point in Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. The most straightforward understanding of this concept is that in the Messianic era, our dead bodies of the righteous will come back to life, and we'll get to reap the rewards that we were previously deprived of in an unjust and broken world. In the Talmud, Rav Yosef teaches, quite radically, that all mitzvot will be nullified in the Messianic era. By saying this blessing up to 3 times a day, we have the opportunity to draw out from it all kinds of other intentions. For example, we might also think about the ways in which God revives us when we lose our way and forget who we are, when we require resuscitation via a push of renewed inspiration. The Abudraham notes that we say Mechayeh Hameitim 3 different times in this bracha. These, he says, are alluding to the 3 kinds of revivification. Man's awakening every morning after death-like slumber. The rain that has the life-sustaining quality of causing vegetation to grow. And the literal revivification of the dead that will take place in the Messianic era. These are the 3. According to Chedushay Ritva, the blessing has 3 references to the resurrection of the dead. One representing the saving of Isaac, one representing the resurrections by prophets, and one representing the resurrection of the dead to come. At death, your body and soul are separated, and at the resurrection, they're reunited. So perhaps we can learn here that the ideal is the soul housed within the body, and not some ethereal existence. What body will return, though? One's elderly body or one's youthful body? One's body from one's first life or one's last life, assuming reincarnation for a moment. It might be that the body is not an old one, but a new one that emerges that is most aligned with the soul. As opposed to a binary or tension between body and soul, they're now united. The Talmud teaches that people with handicaps, when they die, will be resurrected with the same flaw. Then they'll be cured. What would the new body emerge from? The rabbinic teaching shares that the luz bone won't decompose and will be resurrected from there. The Midrash teaches that when Adam and Chava sinned, their whole body had pleasure except for that immortal bone, the luz bone. Some rabbis believe that not everyone gets to return. Daniel the prophet says many, not all, who sleep in the dust shall awaken. The general assumption is that resurrection is for the righteous. Abravanel disagrees, saying it's for all humanity. Even receiving the wisdom of the Torah can be a kind of death and resurrection. There's a story in the Talmud, and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, from each and every utterance that emerged from the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the souls of the Jewish people left their bodies. As it is stated, my soul departed when he spoke, Song of Songs 5:6. And since their souls left their bodies from the first utterance, how did they receive the second utterance? Rather, God rained the dew upon them, that in the future will revive the dead. And he revived them, as it is stated, you, God, poured down a bountiful rain. When your inheritance was weary, you sustained us. Psalms 68:10. Mechayeh Hameitim can serve as a reminder of just how consistent the demand is that we affirm life daily, that we consistently awaken ourselves to higher levels of consciousness. We might even use these three affirmations of life to be reminded of the life of the mind, body, and spirit, which need to all work together for our lives to be unified. It takes awareness to be truly mindful of how the body's life force needs nutrition, exercise, and sleep. We need to nourish our minds by spending time in the realm of the mind and the heart to ensure our intellectual prowess and emotional well-being are intact. Then there's the life of the soul. We must awaken ourselves spiritually to the consciousness beyond the surface of our lives, becoming truly in touch with ourselves, others, and the world. The resurrection of the dead is not merely a theological belief about the future. It's a recognition of the human need for hope. We fight the irrational, intrusive pessimism that plagues us with equally irrational, radical hope. And for much of the tradition, it culminates in this vision of the world to come, as an insistence that there is no place for despair. One thing prayer offers us is a source of strength that when we're exhausted, a boost of enthusiasm when life is a slog, an emotional awakening when we're feeling disheartened. There's kind of a dormant capacity within us that we wish to awaken from a slumber, and this blessing can attune us to a new source of life. According to Iyun Tefillah, the resurrection of the dead is mentioned 5 times in the blessing to represent the 5 parts of the soul: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechidah. This next part of the Gevuro blessing changes based on the time of year. In the spring and summer, we say God causes the dew to descend. And in the fall and winter, we say causer of the wind to blow and of the rain to fall. It can seem as though we're jumping all over the place. We go from God's might and ability to resurrect the dead to talking about the weather. But what are the seasons if not a yearly cycle of new life? Even now, when most of us don't work in agriculture, we can feel the symbolic wind, rain, and dew in the ebbs and flows of our own lives. Just as a farmer's work is nothing without the cooperation of God, the work of our lives is nothing without God's help. With the right consciousness, we can perceive the blessings that rain on us as we do the constant task of resurrecting our lives. Rabbi Yochanan is quoted in the Talmud. There are 3 keys maintained in the hand of the Holy One, blessed be He, which were not transmitted to an intermediary, i.e. God. God tends to these matters himself. And they are the key of rain, the key of birthing, and the key of the resurrection of the dead. I'm struck by how in the same blessing we're referring to the sprouting of vegetation and the sprouting of people like seeds from the ground. Both depend so entirely on the outside mercy of the universe. With this portion on rain, we're still praising God's power, but there's almost a hidden request. We're saying, you, God, are the one who causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. God, when you're using that power, keep us in mind. Use your power for our benefit. We know that God controls all water. It's one of the first things we see in the Bible. But water is also central for all life. Water, as we're about to see, is just one of the many ways we can experience and be grateful for God's loving kindness. We are sustained and revived with water, but more broadly, we are sustained and revived with kindness itself. The blessing continues. Sustainer of the living with kindliness, resurrector of the dead with great mercy. In a society as complex as ours, food and water are not enough, and even bestowing food and water out of kindness is not enough. It takes godly human kindness to recognize and meet the needs of all people, and equally important is that all people feel love itself. God's power is used to give us life, but it's also used to give us the gift of compassion, which we have the ability to spread so we can spiritually revive others. The bracha lists several different ways that God shows compassion. We call God supporter of the fallen, and healer of the sick, and releaser of the imprisoned, and fulfiller of God's faithfulness to those who sleep in the dust. If we're praising a mighty God, shouldn't we expect that God especially loves the mighty among us? But no, like a parent who can't focus on their most accomplished child, only focus on the most accomplished child, God is focused on those who have fallen. And that is what we must do as well. When we are physically ill, our bodies have innate powers that heal us almost miraculously. Those are complemented by the work of physicians and researchers who heal the sick by developing and implementing cures, procedures, and treatments. Mentally, too, we are often able to drastically improve our lives with the right support. And when we're down spiritually, the reminder that there's nothing outside of God's presence can cure our bereftness. Perhaps Leonard Cohen put it best, putting words in the mouth of God. Now I greet you from the other side of sorrow and despair. With a love so vast and so shattered, it will reach you everywhere. Then in the blessing, there's the mention that God is the releaser of the imprisoned. Those words intimate that God unbinds us, unites us from our constrictions. God doesn't only free and redeem us, God liberates from all different forms of captivity. Here we can find such deep divine solidarity with a God who wants to heal and liberate us, restoring our dignity. The Talmud describes a fascinating exchange between Rabbi Meir and, of all people, Queen Cleopatra. The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us, Queen Cleopatra asked Rabbi Meir a question. She said, I know that the dead will live, as it is written, and may they blossom out of the city like grass of the earth, Psalm 72:16. Just as grass grows, so too the dead will come to life. But when they arise, will they arise naked or will they arise with their garments? Rabbi Meir said to her, it is derived a fortiori from wheat. If wheat, which is buried naked, meaning that the kernel is sown without the chaff, emerges with several garments of chaff, all the more so will the righteous who are buried with their garments arise with their garments. When Queen Cleopatra asks whether the dead will be resurrected naked or clothed, Rabbi Meir explains that they will be clothed as an act of mercy toward these people to honor their dignity. We often say that the first bracha is dedicated to Avraham for his loving kindness. The blessing of might now is in the merit of his son Yitzchak, whose soul left his body for a moment when he was about to be sacrificed before God returned it in the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. We say that God keeps faith with those who sleep in the dust. But what does it mean that God has faith? It means that nobody is irredeemable, nobody is beyond repair, and nobody is forgotten. The person who has no job, no money, and no family, and is unconscious in the dirt, God sees them and loves them. Shouldn't we as well? As the blessing heads toward its conclusion, we say, who is like you, master of mighty deeds, and who can be compared to you? Of course, this is a rhetorical question. No one is like God, but we say it needs the reminder because it's all too easy to try to replace the role of God with some president, celebrity, or religious leader. We might even expect ourselves to be all-powerful. We remind ourselves that this is a God we can never fully know or see or replicate. A God so mighty and great specifically because of God's kindness and love. We conclude, King who causes death and restores life, and causes deliverance to sprout forth. And you are faithful to restore the dead to life. Blessed are you, Hashem, resurrector of the dead. It is said that a Soviet interrogator once pointed a gun at the 6th Chabad Rebbe and said, this toy has a way of making people cooperate. The Rebbe's reply, that toy is persuasive to one who has many gods and only one world. I have one God and two worlds. It would have been enough had we just been given one life. But how merciful is it that we can return to a utopia? In whatever era people toil in their history, they can return to experience the actualization of their work. Rabbi Dr. Yitz Greenberg teaches about how central resurrection of the dead is to a Jewish moral vision of life affirmation. The rabbis were so insistent, he writes, on the centrality of resurrection that they positioned it in the second opening blessing of the Shemoneh Esrei, the 18 blessings, itself the central prayer of the rabbinic liturgy. The blessing, Mechayeh Hameitim, who revives the dead, is said 3 times a day, every day at the peak moment of the service, and said 4 and 5 times a day on Shabbat and holidays. The rabbis of the Mishnah even insisted that one who denies resurrection of the dead forfeits the divine gift of immortality of the soul in the world to come. I suspect this was their veto of the idea that immortality is more believable than regaining the life of a desiccating body. They were not willing to follow a religious strategy that proposed immortality and immortality alone as the consolation prize for having experienced the disappointment of injustice or innocent suffering during our earthly sojourn. Rav Yitz teaches that one can offer religious consolation after the passing of a loved one, either from the idea that they are now with God or that they're now in the next world. But he shares how limited this approach is. He writes, "Yet all these resolutions have an element of falsity to them. To accept this consolation, one must block out the full presence, the incarnate person whom I loved. That person in all their uniqueness, physical, emotional, intellectual. That person with all their winning behaviors, all their flaws, all their specific being is the one I loved. There is no equivalent being. There is no substitute experience that can make me whole following the loss. A future spiritual reunion may be sublime, but it will lack the bodily, 3-dimensional embrace of the person I loved. This sweaty, odoriferous, sometimes vital, sometimes frail, vulnerable, mortal person is the one I loved and who loved me. The only full correction of the loss would be to restore the actual embodied whole person whom I loved. This is the moral basis of the human need for nothing less than resurrection. Out of total love, trust, and at-homeness with a loving God, Judaism drew the strength to assert that when the world is perfected, the original love will be confirmed by the restoration of the loved one. Friends, from this perspective, Judaism is so radically life-affirming and so committed to justice that there can be nothing short of a full return of the whole person in the Messianic era. It can be difficult to hold in tension simultaneously the ideas that this life is of the utmost importance and there are things that are vastly bigger than it. By fulfilling our potential in this world means giving proper attention to both. It means relentlessly looking for opportunities for revitalization to ensure that death and despair can never conquer us.